I'm Adam Sanders, and this is a Beer Question Answered. Today's question is, what is an IPA? Now, lots of you already know what IPA is, but some of you might not. This video is going to be a brief introduction to the IPA style. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of IPA and also some of its defining characteristics. Okay, let's start with the basics. What does IPA even mean? IPA stands for India Pale Ale. I want to talk about the word India in just a minute, but first I want to explain what the word pale means in India Pale Ale. Now, if you've ever had a pale ale or an India Pale Ale before, you've probably noticed that the beer isn't actually what we might describe as pale. They're often copper-colored. Ironically, most of the beers Americans consume are paler in color than pale ales are. So what's the pale mean? Is it a misnomer? Well, to understand why these beers are called pale, you've got to understand a little something about the history of English ale brewing. Until the mid-18th century, most English ales were quite dark in color. This is because brewers used wood fires to kiln their malted barley. Now, wood fire temperatures were difficult to control, and brewers had to kiln the barley until it was quite dark in color in order to make sure that enough fermentable sugars would be unlocked to successfully brew beer. However, technical progress in the 18th century allowed brewers to begin using coke, a form of coal, to fire their kilns. Coke fire temperatures were hotter and easier to control than wood fires. Brewers found that using coke fires, they could produce a malted barley that was much lighter in color than normal, yet still had plenty of fermentable sugars in order to brew beer. Now, naturally, this lighter colored malted barley produced a beer that was lighter in color than the beers that had preceded it. Pale ale was born. The English were understandably pretty excited about pale ale. It kind of reminds me of the revelation I had in second grade when I looked around the lunchroom one day and realized that all these kids were eating delicious-looking, fluffy, white Wonder Bread, and I'd been stuck with wheat bread all my life. Thanks, Mom. Okay, so that's where the word pale comes from, but what about the word India? As you probably know, India was once colonized by Britain. Consequently, ships regularly traveled from Britain to India, bringing troops and supplies. Naturally, one of the supplies most in demand by soldiers was good English beer, but sadly, the long voyage often wasn't kind to the beer. Microorganisms could infect the beer, and there's really nothing worse than popping a cap to discover that your beer smells like King George's foot. Fortunately for history, however, brewers discovered that they could fortify beer for its transoceanic journey by adding lots of hops and by upping the alcohol content. The acid in the hops and the high alcohol in the beer both warded off infection. The British, imaginative as ever, referred to this beer as pale ale as prepared for export to India. However, in 1835, the Liverpool Mercury newspaper ran an advertisement that for the first time referred to India Pale Ale. The name stuck. Okay, so flash forward to 2010, where IPAs are one of the most popular styles of craft beer in America. Do they taste like those original English IPAs? Well, probably not. There's some dispute about what the early English IPAs tasted like, but one obvious difference is that American IPAs tend to use American varieties of hops. Now, American hops are famous for their strong floral, citrus, and piney aromas and flavors. This is quite different from the earthy and cleanly bitter flavors of English hops. However, like its English ancestor, American IPAs do tend to be high in alcohol, usually ranging from 5.5% to 7.5% alcohol by volume. Now, as we know, America is a land where things tend to go towards extremes, and beer's not exempt from this trend. Recent years have seen American brewers experimenting and creating bigger, badder, and more intense IPAs than ever. These beers are often referred to as double IPAs or imperial IPAs. Also, as tends to happen in America, there's a bit of coastal rivalry going on. Though it's not a hard and fast distinction, West Coast IPAs tend to really feature those bruising, resinous, and citric hops, while East Coast IPAs tend to be a little bit closer to their European brethren, often featuring European hop varieties that are more herbal or earthy or spicy, and being a little bit more maltier and sweeter. Well, that's about it for this cursory crash course introduction into IPAs. You know, the best way to learn about a style is simply to drink it, and I plan on drinking a lot of IPAs on camera in the weeks and months ahead. There are also a lot of great video reviews of IPAs out there that are worth checking out. Well, thanks for watching. Cheers!